Hello friends and welcome back to the channel. I know, I was gone last week. I was throwing up. I don't have anything else to say about it. I was sick, so couldn't make a video. I did have something planned, but I just did not have the time or energy to do it. So we are back though, and I decided the next video that I'm doing is Tier 4 and Tier 5 of the psychological horror movie Iceberg. Obviously, before I get into the video, if you want to view the original Iceberg, I'll leave the link to it down below because I did not create the Iceberg. I don't know if there's been confusion about whether or not I created it. Obviously, if I made an Iceberg, I would probably only pick movies that I had already seen on there. So there's a lot of movies on this list that I haven't seen and some that I haven't even heard of before looking at this list. So just in case there was some confusion there. Also, I will leave a link to my Letterboxd list of the movies that I could find. Towards the bottom, there's a few that are missing, but for the most part, all of the movies from, these top tiers are on that list. But without further ado, let's get into Tier 4. Starting off with the movie Better Watch Out. It's a 2016 film directed by Chris Peckover. The film stars Olivia DeJonge. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it. She was also in the movie The Visit, but she's starring alongside Levi Miller and Ed Oxenbould. So this film takes place during Christmas, which I feel like there's actually quite a few Christmas psychological horror movies that are on this Iceberg, and this is one of them. It also seems like Olivia DeJonge likes to star in films where she's starring next to both Ed Oxenbould, just generally being an older sister type of character. And I remember when this film came out and the trailers were showing, and I had no interest in seeing this movie. Maybe it's just because I'm not a huge fan of watching very young teens or tweens in these types of films, especially when there's sort of a comedic element to it. But then again, I haven't seen this film, so it may be a lot better than I think that it is. It's not to say that I wouldn't see this film, because obviously I like to watch films that I don't think are going to be good just to see if they exceed my expectations. But essentially the film follows a babysitter and the two sort of tween boys. I don't know, they're somewhere around 12 or 13 that she is watching after, sort of around the Christmas time, and it kind of has a little bit of a Home Alone inspiration there, where it seems like someone is trying to break into the house, but the tables sort of turn. Again, there's comedic elements to it, but it's also supposed to be psychological horror. The next film is Cam. It's a 2018 film directed by Daniel Goldhaber and starring Madeline Brewer. The film follows a cam girl who goes by Lola, and as she is, camming and doing what she does on live stream, she finds that something weird starts to happen as she is watching another channel that has her face and her image on the channel. However, she doesn't remember filming or live streaming any of what she's seeing. Obviously, part of the horror of this film has to do with sort of the idea of deepfakes and this idea that someone or something could take over your image and your identity and essentially just do whatever they'd like, whether you like it or not. And obviously in this film, there's more of a supernatural type of element to it rather than somebody specifically going after her to use her image, as much as it is something weird is happening amongst the technology itself. I think the other part of the horror of this film is just the idea of being a cam girl or doing this sort of work online, because not only is it scary to think that someone could make a deepfake of you and just create videos and images without your consent, but also the scary life of somebody who is a cam girl in general, that it isn't safe, even though it's a lot safer than in-person sort of sex work. especially in real life, it can be extremely dangerous. And so a lot of people have turned to doing things like being a cam girl. But unfortunately, it's still very scary. And a lot of women, especially, are still like stalked and hurt by the people that view them online. Christmas Evil is a 1980 slasher film directed by Lewis Jackson, starring Brandon Maggart. Again, this is another one that deals with Christmas. It's a man who is obsessed with Santa and dresses up as Santa to go on a rampage. I think a lot of these older sort of like Christmas slasher films tend to follow a very similar storyline, which is somebody views Santa when they were a kid doing something awful, or doing something that would traumatize them, and then they like take that and make it their entire identity into their adulthood to go on a rampage. And yeah, I will say that low-key, I am someone who kind of just really loves, like, classic Christmas vibes, so I am not usually the type to watch something that is a Christmas slasher, but I won't say that I wouldn't. I just don't know if it would be my Christmas time viewing, but I also know that a lot of these slasher type of movies do develop a cult following, and so it also becomes, like, a classic for Christmas and horror fans. I also want to mention that this tier includes a lot of originals and remakes, or like doubles. So the next one, Flatliners, includes the 1990 version and the 2017 remake. So the 1990 version of Flatliners is directed by Joel Schumacher and stars Kiefer Sutherland, Julie Roberts, and Kevin Bacon. The film follows 5 medical students who try to figure out what happens after you die or if there is an afterlife, and they do this by dying and then coming back to life, essentially creating these sort of near-death experiences in the same way that many people will flatline for a short period of time before they are brought back, usually, by some sort of electrical or shock. There's also a group of films that like follow this same sort of sci-fi bring back to life, or is there life after death sort of experiment, sort of like the Lazarus effect. And I find it very interesting that in the remake they brought back Kiefer Sutherland, but they also have, of course, a newer cast, like with the addition of Elliot Page. And of course, within these films, they do the different experiments of, trying to reach a state of death in flatlining and then coming back and trying to tell each other like what they have seen. And of course it gets out of hand, it gets sort of scary, not only because like someone could not come back, but also with weird happenings going on as well. I think films like this definitely fall into the category of it's scary because we all sort of have that question, but when you do try to, play with life and death, it can get out of hand really easily, as well as it can just be traumatic. Like, maybe these are questions that we don't really need answers to until we actually get to that bridge. Frozen is a 2010 film that I have talked about on my channel before because it is so 2000s movie. I don't know how else to explain it. It was directed by Adam Green and stars Shawn Ashmore, Kevin Zegers, and Emma Bell. The plot of this film is pretty simple. 3 teenagers get on a ski lift when they shouldn't, and they get stuck up there. And it's just a movie about survival. You've got the tension within the group. You've got 2 of them that are coupled, so you've got like tension between the couple and like the single one. Then of course you have like everyone trying to like come to terms with the fact that like they might not make it. It's definitely one of those like exactly what's going to happen. The synopsis is the whole thing. So at the beginning when they are, dinking around and saying, "Oh, I'm not going to bring my cell phone," or "I'm just going to do this," you know exactly why that is going to be a problem later. Maniac is a 1980 film that was remade in 2012. The 1980 version was directed by William Lustig, and the 2012 version was directed by Frank Calhoun. This one is yet another slasher. It is a man who goes on a rampage. There's not much to say about either of these films because they're a pretty simple, like, synopsis, and if you like slashers or you like sort of this, like, serial killer POV type of film, or if you're just, like, into, like, remakes, things like that, then I would suggest these movies. One thing that I do find interesting is that in the remake, they specify that the man who is going on the rampage is schizophrenic, which you know how I feel about the misrepresentation of mental illness on screen. I don't know why they had to specify that when I think everyone would be perfectly fine just being like, this dude's just crazy. He's doing what he's doing. He's crazy. He's a maniac. You know? May is a 2002 film directed by Lucky McKee, starring Angela Bettis. It also has Jeremy Sisto, Anna Faris, and James Duvall. The film, of course, is about May, and she is a teenager with some issues, with some psychological issues. She's a little weird, maybe a little disconnected from her peer group. The film really just follows her struggle to both deal with sort of like what's going on in her own head, as well as the way that things manifest outside of her, like externally, like through her hobbies of like being a vet clinic assistant, as well as her sort of collection of dolls and sewing outfits for them and things like that. But not only that, she is also trying to connect with the people around her, and so obviously the tension comes from her interests, and again, the way she sort of externalizes her feelings is not very well received or reciprocated by her classmates and other peers. So Unsane is a 2018 film directed by Steven Soderbergh and stars Claire Foy. One of the main things that people know about this film is that it was shot on an iPhone and shot only in 10 days. And I won't say, oh yeah, you can tell, but also you can tell that it was shot that way. It definitely has more of like an independent sort of low budget vibe to it, but I don't think that necessarily makes a movie bad. The film follows a woman who ends up in a mental institution after she is pursued by a stalker, and this film is one of those films where it's sort of hard to tell like what's real and maybe what's imagined because there's a lot of paranoia that we see from her point of view, but at the same time it like makes sense because if you have ever been stalked before, it makes sense to be paranoid. However, it's also a look into sort of the way that mental institutions in themselves, or in sort of the way that when we try to receive help, that you can end up being stuck in a cycle or stuck in a place like this where maybe you feel you don't belong, or it's definitely one of those films where the mental institution, you can't tell if they are helping people or actually making them insane. When a Stranger Calls is another film that was remade a little bit later on. So we have the 1979 version directed by Fred Walton starring Carol Kane, and the 2006 version directed by Simon West starring Camilla Bell. So the 1979 version follows a young woman who is getting these phone calls from a stranger while she is babysitting, and of course like this creepy killer guy who is on the other end, tries to get her, but as she is receiving these calls and like the killer is, tormenting her and stuff, she ends up escaping, and we find out that this killer, he ends up going to jail, well, a psychiatric ward of a jail, but needless to say, he's apprehended, but years later, he comes back. We also have, like, the coinciding story of, like, the police officer or, like, detective who is trying to find the psychopathic killer. So, like, there's a lot happening in the 1979 version. However, in the 2006 version, it is, like, all suspense. It's literally just the first part of the 1979 version where Camilla Bell's character is just receiving calls and she's trying to escape this dude. There's not much else that happens in the film, but these people live in a really big mansion-y type place with lots of windows, and the call is always coming from inside the house, of course. Triangle is a film that has been on my list for a very long time, and if I get the chance either tonight or tomorrow, I will probably try to watch it because I really want to. It's a 2009 film directed by Christopher Smith, and of course it stars sort of an ensemble cast. The film mostly follows a woman named Jess, but essentially she and her friends like go on this sort of little boat trip, but things don't go as planned and they end up having to board this sea liner, but it seems like it's abandoned, but also maybe somebody is after them. So this movie is one of those movies that has a twist, so I would not recommend looking into it any further than the trailer, especially because I think that this film is really interesting from what I've heard about it. So Censor is a 2021 film directed by Prano Bailey Bond, or Prano, not sure how to pronounce that, and it stars Neve Algar. So this film is set in 1985, and it's about a woman named Enid, and she works for like the British Board of like censorship. I don't remember, what do they call it? British Board of Film Classification. This was one of those films where I kind of had to look up exactly what they were talking about because this is supposedly taking place during the height of the video nasty era, I guess, and they specifically included a lot of violence, and so a lot of these sort of VHS tapes were being distributed pretty frequently, and this is why they had to sort of create this more review board, and so Enid is on this review board. Needless to say, as part of her job, she's watching different VHS tapes, and she finds one that stars or includes a woman who sort of looks like who she believes to be her sister. Apparently, her sister disappeared when she was younger, and, obviously she doesn't know what happened to her, so this is when she sort of tries to delve more into what is going on. But obviously, viewing this sort of, like, violence on a regular can really do things to your mental health and like your sense of like reality. The House That Jack Built is a 2018 film directed by Lars von Trier and stars Matt Dillon. This is yet another serial killer movie. This one has more of a quiet darkness to it, although it is very clear that Matt Dillon's character is a serial killer, like that he goes around killing people. It's very much so less of a slasher and more of just a, like, again, psychological, in the mind of, again, very quiet, gives very, like, a 70s sort of vibe of, like, he's getting away with it because no one is paying attention. The film also has sort of this larger omniscient presence about it because the way that we sort of view his remembering, I guess, of his different killings over a decade is sort of replayed to Jack by the Roman poet Virgil. It sort of has the vibe that Jack is trying to get into heaven in a sense, and so he tries to sort of, defend his actions and defend himself in a way to Virgil. There's also the subtext of, like, Dante's Inferno, so, like, there's a lot happening with this film, like, there's a lot of, again, like, subtext to it, so, like, if you're looking for something that, again, is just, like, straight slasher, that is not this film. The Fury is a 1978 film directed by Brian De Palma and stars Kirk Douglas. The film follows Kirk Douglas's character, who is an ex-CIA agent whose son gets taken by this, like, secret organization, and he uses somebody who has these, like, psychic abilities to lead him to his son. There's a lot of, like, supernatural elements to this film, but also sort of, like, the government, secret, CIA type of vibe as well. So, like, there's a weird combination of genres here that makes it really interesting and kind of weird. It's also based on a book, so there's the possibility that the film sort of has a lot of things going on with it because the book obviously has a lot of things going on with it, maybe more than a movie could tell. I don't know if you would really call this a horror film as much as it would be like a psychological, supernatural thriller, maybe. Run Rabbit Run is a 2023 film directed by Dana Reed, starring Sarah Snook, and it's an Australian film. The film follows Sarah Snook's character as her daughter has her 7th birthday, and after they find a rabbit in their house, weird things start to happen. The daughter starts acting sort of strange, just not like she ever has before, sort of aloof and a little angry. I would put this film in the same category as The Babadook because it sort of deals with like childhood trauma and I guess like the darkness of children, and I don't mean that in a way to say that like all children are evil or something like that or there's an inherent evil, but sort of the way that, you know, when you're a child, when you are angry, when you know, are feeling new emotions, complex emotions, they can manifest in ways that are uncomfortable and maybe don't make sense externally and can lead again to like traumatic things happening. There's a lot of really heavy themes in this film. It can be a little bit slow when you watch it the first time, especially because of just like how they have like paced out some of the horror, because I don't think there's so much horror in the film as much as, again, I think there's larger themes at play, again, that have to do with like family and childhood and trauma and just sort of the idea of like taking responsibility for oneself and one's actions, even if that has to do with childhood. The Girl with All the Gifts is a 2016 film directed by Colm McCarthy, starring Sania Nanwa. This film is, no surprise, based on a book. It's sort of in a dystopian future type of world, and I feel like a lot of films that are made in that sort of setting are usually ones that are based on a book. The synopsis is pretty much like what the title says that it is. There's a girl named Melanie with a lot of gifts, very special abilities and whatnot, and this group of people surrounding her are essentially trying to like survive. There's sort of like a prison break but also zombie vibe to it. It's again a combination of like a lot of different like elements, and I think it looks like really interesting. I just don't know how it really falls into like psychological horror. The final film in tier 4 is The Hole in the Ground. It's a 2019 film directed by Lee Cronin, starring Shauna Kerslake, James Quinn Markey. This is another one of those films where someone disappears for a period of time, and when they come back, they don't seem like themselves. In this case, it is a woman whose son disappears into sort of this like sinkhole in the ground, i.e. the hole in the ground, and again, he comes back and he's very different. He starts doing very like weird and out of character things, sort of aloof, creepy, you know, things you don't want a child to be. But that is all for tier 4. Let's move on to tier 5. The Cell is a 2000 film directed by Tarsem Singh and starring Jennifer Lopez, Vincent D'Onofrio and Vince Vaughn. This film is one of those classic sci-fi films where it's supposed to feel like it's not that far in the future, but they have like ridiculous technology like in Face Off or Minority Report, because in this film, J-Lo is a child psychologist and she is trying to figure out where a serial killer has hidden his next victim or his current victim. This film feels like a combination between Minority Report and Inception, because she's trying to like go inside different people's heads and like into their consciousness to like see what's happening and like figure out and solve this little crime. A Cure for Wellness is a 2016 film directed by Gore Verbinski, and stars Dane DeHaan. I remember when I first saw the trailer for this film, I really wanted to see it. The film is inspired by the novel The Magic Mountain, and it follows Dane DeHaan's character as he goes to find the CEO of the company that he works for at this sort of rehabilitation center. However, things get really weird, and kind of creepy. This is another film where you can't really tell what's real and what's fake. Sort of we know that something is not right about this like wellness center. Like, are they drugging me? Is what I'm seeing hallucinations? Again, are they telling me the truth or not? Sort of films. P2 is a 2007 film directed by Frank Calhoun and stars Rachel Nichols and Wes Bentley. Before I read the synopsis for this film, I did not realize, I couldn't figure out what P2 would stand for, but P2 is supposed to be like a parking level of a garage because it's about a woman who is stuck in a parking garage, and of course it's on Christmas Eve, so nobody else is around, and she gets sort of like stalked/hunted by a security guard there. Unfortunately, this is mostly a scary film for women because this sort of stuff actually happens. It's literally based on a series of events that happen to women. They specifically based it on a group of events that happened in Paris, but again, this could literally happen anywhere, where a man becomes obsessed with you to the point that he will like stalk and trap you in order to get to you, in order to like, whatever they want. Silent House is a 2011 film directed by Chris Kentis and starring Elizabeth Olsen. The film follows Elizabeth Olsen's character as she goes to her family's vacation home to sort of tidy it up, to clean it, and as she is there, she ends up getting like tormented by like the haunted nature of the house. She also happens to be there with her father and her uncle, by the way. Part of the uniqueness of the film is that it is supposed to be sort of in real time and also implements sort of the idea of a continuous type of shot. So if the film is 86 minutes, then you're going to spend 86 continuous minutes without lots of like cuts or any sort of thing in between. Also, apparently this film is a remake of a Uruguayan film called La Casa Muda, the Silent House, which is also based on real events, I guess, that happened in a village in the 1940s in Uruguay. Would You Rather is a 2012 film directed by David Guy Levy and starring Brittany Snow, as well as sort of an ensemble cast. This is one of those films where a bunch of people are gathered to the same place to play a sadistic game. In this case, it is Would You Rather, where Brittany Snow's character specifically decides to join the game after she finds out that she really doesn't have the money to pay for her brother's like cancer treatments, and so sort of, I guess, a friend or a doctor, I can't remember if it's her, yeah, it's her doctor that recommends this very wealthy man who likes to help people. And so the doctor sort of like recommends this guy, and when she shows up, of course, it is like a dangerous game of Would You Rather with a group of other people who are also desperate for money. I remember when this film was advertised, I was not interested in seeing it, and then one day I just decided to watch it, and I personally didn't really like it. I don't know, sadistic games where people have to make choices about things are always like hit or miss for me, and this is no offense to Brittany Snow, but like she'll always read to me as sort of like a comedy type of actress, like someone that like is sort of in either bad scary movies or like in fairly good comedies. You Should Have Left is a 2020 film directed by David Kopp and starring Kevin Bacon and Amanda Seyfried. Now, of course, this film is based on a book of the same name written by Daniel Kellman. It follows a little family that decides to go on vacation, but when they get to the house, things get kind of weird. Part of the film, of course, is like them dealing with like their internal like family issues and stuff, like the husband being super jealous of his like wife and, you know, potential people that she could be like cheating on him with. But then you also just sort of have like the back and forth. Yeah, there's not much to say about this film. It's again sort of like a mystery psychological type of vibe of like, you know, the paranoia of the husband, as well as like he should really be more paranoid in the fact that he's getting messages that they should leave the house because something is not right. Images is a 1972 film directed by Robert Altman and starring Susanna York. This is another Women Be Crazy film. We're looking into the mind of a woman who is like a children's book author. So she decides to get away by going to like a secluded vacation home that they have, but of course like it makes all of her delusions and hallucinations so much worse. Possum is a 2018 film directed by Matthew Holness and starring Sean Harris. It's a UK film. I have talked about it and reviewed it here on my channel, so if you want to, you can check it out in full. But essentially it is about a man who comes back to his family home where his uncle lives. Like the uncle is the man who sort of like raised him and took care of him, but he's just not a very good fatherly type of figure. He's very like abusive, but he comes back and he has this creepy puppet that he's trying to get rid of. A lot of the film it's very much a character study. If you don't like films that just sort of follow one person and their sort of thoughts and feelings, it won't be for you. But there's a lot of like little creepy things happening, especially because the puppet is extremely creepy. The film deals with trauma, and especially trauma from like your childhood and whatnot, and of course it deals with like abuse within the family. So yeah, I really like the film, highly recommend it. If you don't want to see it, you can watch my review on it. Berlin Syndrome is a 2017 film directed by Kate Shortland and starring Teresa Palmer. This film is also a film that is based on a book of the same name. It follows a woman who travels to Germany where she sort of has like a little one-night stand type of thing, like a little romance with this guy. But when she wakes up the next morning, she finds that she has been taken hostage by this guy. Again, this is yet another film that's like in every woman's nightmare of a man like taking her hostage after having one encounter with them. Obviously, like this one goes like to the very edge of like crazy with like what happens. Climax is a 2018 film directed by Gaspar Noé. I'm not really sure. It stars Sofia Boutella, but it's also a very large ensemble cast because it's about sort of this Parisian dance troupe who, you know, after they have completed their final rehearsal, they decide to party, and they party hard. A lot of the dancers start to have weird hallucinations, and it gets very scary very quickly. I think this is one of those lessons in like, if you are going to do, you know, hallucinatory drugs, you should be very careful, and you should, you know, try to do it in like a safe space because you never know how your brain is going to react to that. Obviously, I'm not sitting here recommending doing drugs, but like at the same time, if no one's going to stop you, do it in a safe place with safe people who are also like who are sober potentially. This film looks really interesting because the concept itself is really interesting, just like a whole bunch of people, along with sort of this like dance sort of vibe. It has sort of a theatrical nature to it, like inherently, because there are like dance sequences, and there's also just really, really long takes. And most of the people who were participating weren't actors or just didn't have any acting experience to begin with. So I think it's just a very interesting film that sort of like came together in a really, I guess you could say, magical way. Incident in a Ghostland, or sometimes referred to as just Ghostland, is a 2018 film directed by Pascal Laugier and stars Taylor Hickson, Emilia Jones, Anastasia Phillips, and Crystal Reed. The film is about a mother and her two daughters who inherit a house from like the aunt, i.e. the mom's sister, and they find out that there had been a string of sort of like break-ins and like intruders in the area, where the intruders would kill the adults or the parents but leave the children. However, when the intruders break in, the mother like sort of fights them off, and we cut to like years in the future where one of the daughters has gone on to live her life and written a book about it and everything. However, she gets called back to the house by her sister, and this is when things start to get sort of concerning. A lot of the film is sort of her like dealing with the trauma, sort of dealing with what's going on, because you know she had sort of moved on in the outside world, whereas her like sister and mother were sort of like trapped in this house to live with the trauma. But yeah, a lot of this film is just like dealing with trauma and sort of like trying to figure out like what the reality of the situation is. The Forest is a 2016 film directed by Jason Zada and starring Natalie Dormer. The film is about a woman whose sister goes missing, and she believes that her sister is possibly missing in a Japanese forest where people are known to take their own lives. And of course, this is one of those films where, like, you can't really tell exactly what's real and what's fake. You know, you sort of start to get confused, maybe a little bit delusional as you are, like, going within the forest. I think I remember when this movie was coming out, and I thought it looked kind of interesting, especially because, like, you have the element of it taking place, like, in Japan, and sort of, like, the, I guess, lore behind this idea, because it is a real thing that happens. Possessor is a 2020 film directed by Brandon Cronenberg and starring Andrea Riseborough. This is another sci-fi horror film where the main character is a woman who is an assassin, but they use sort of this like chip implantation type of thing to possess other people's bodies to carry out the hits. However, when she enters this specific man's psyche, this specific man's head, she is sort of like fighting his brain. He's not giving it up, right? This film sort of deals with the ideas of like memories and identity and like what that really means, but also at the same time it's like a fun little sci-fi vibe. The final film in Tier 5 is The Rental. It's a 2020 film directed by Dave Franco, starring Sheila Vann, Jeremy Allen White, Alison Brie, and Dan Stevens. The film follows two couples who are on vacation, and they start to think that maybe the person that they are renting their house from is spying on them. This is one of those films that sort of includes the paranoia of somebody watching you, as well as like the interpersonal relationships between the couples, like dealing with like jealousy, secrets, things like that. And given that this film is on the list, I'm surprised that something like 13 or 14 cameras didn't end up on the list, because it's a very similar movie, except for it's more of a found footage type of film where the man who is renting his place or these places to people is literally watching them. But with that, that is all the movies that are on tiers 4 and 5. I'm hoping that maybe I'll do 6, 7, and 8 next, and then to do tier 9 and 10 together, potentially. They have quite a few. Tier 10 has over 50, so... But like I said before, the links to both the original Iceberg as well as my Letterboxd list will be down below. And of course, just a quick reminder that next week I will be doing my podcast episode, and hopefully the week after that I will be doing tiers 6 and 7 and potentially 8 at the same time, so we'll see. Either way, that's all I got for you, so I will see you guys in the next one.